The yelling started before daylight. I was in the kitchen flipping pancakes when I heard my wife shouting from the front of the ranch. At first, I figured one of the goats had escaped again, but then another voice rang out louder, shriller. It was her again. Karen, the head of the HOA. I dropped the spatula and rushed outside, barefoot and still wearing my sleep shirt. What I saw made me freeze. Karen stood right in the middle of our gravel driveway, phone held up, recording my wife like she was catching a criminal in the act. My wife, calm and composed with her arms crossed over the badge pinned to her chest, held her ground. Behind her, one of our ranch gates stood slightly ajar. Karen was yelling, "You have no right to be here. This land falls under HOA rules. You're trespassing and threatening me." Melissa didn't flinch. Her voice was firm, steady. "Ma'am, you came through our fence without permission. That's criminal trespass. You need to step back now." Karen's voice shook as she jabbed at her phone. "I'm calling the police. You're harassing me. You're a trespasser and a threat to the neighborhood." Here's the thing, Melissa is the police. And not just any officer. She's the newly appointed police chief for the entire county. Karen had absolutely no clue. Right then, I saw Melissa take a slow, deliberate step forward and lift her badge. But before she could even speak, Karen's call connected and she screamed into the phone, "There's a dangerous woman on my street pretending to be a cop." I couldn't believe it. She was calling the police on the police chief. I tried to intervene, but I was too late. Karen kept trending, oblivious. Melissa calmly started unzipping her outer jacket, revealing her full police uniform underneath. And just as she did, the distant wail of sirens began echoing through the air. That was the moment everything shifted. Let me take you back to how it all began. It started a few months earlier when we moved into a peaceful area on the outskirts of town. I'm Daniel, and my wife's name is Melissa. For years, we dreamed of owning land somewhere quiet, open, and far from city noise. After Melissa's promotion to police chief, we sold our home in the city and bought a ranch right along the edge of Pine Hill Estates. Our property didn't fall within the actual HOA boundaries, but it used to be part of the original subdivision before being sold off decades ago. The old ranch house needed repairs, but the land was everything we wanted: rolling pastures, a modest barn, and a clear creek running along the back fence. At first, life was good. Melissa woke early to tend the animals, and I stayed busy working from home as a freelance writer. We kept to ourselves, planted flowers near the porch, fixed up the barn, nothing extravagant. Then came the first note, a handwritten envelope tucked under our windshield wiper. No name, no return address, just a message: "Your gate must be repainted to HOA approved color, gray only, not black." We didn't think much of it. Melissa crumpled it up and tossed it into the recycling bin. Then came a second one, this time taped to our mailbox. "No livestock permitted within Pine Hill jurisdiction. You're violating Section 8B. Only we weren't. We had double-checked all the documents and maps before buying. Our land wasn't subject to HOA authority. But Karen, the HOA president, seemed to think otherwise, probably because our driveway happened to connect to a shared private road. Still, Melissa gave her the benefit of the doubt. She even went to an home meeting to introduce herself and let them know we were courteous neighbors. That's when everything began to unravel. Karen took one look at Melissa in her jeans and ranch boots and turned up her nose. "I hope you're not planning on keeping animals," she sneered. "This isn't a petting zoo." Melissa stayed polite. "We're well within our rights, but we're good neighbors. You won't have any trouble from us." Karen gave a cold laugh and leaned in close. "We'll see about that." From then on, it was all-out warfare. Karen made a habit of walking her dog past our fence multiple times a day. She'd slow down, snap photos, and shake her head like we were constructing a missile silo instead of a chicken coop. One afternoon, she stood by the fence screaming at Tony, our ranch hand, accusing him of polluting the creek just because he rinsed mud off his boots nearby. Melissa approached her calmly. "Karen, please stay on your side of the fence." Karen's tone jumped. "You don't tell me what to do. You're just some housewife with a fake badge from a pretend town department." I saw Melissa's eye twitch, but she didn't take the bait. "I'm not going to argue with you. Just stay off our land." Karen turned on her heel and stormed off in a fury. And then things escalated even further. We'd recently installed a small security camera by the gate out just a precaution since coyotes had been spotted near the property. But Karen stormed up to the fence one day, flailing her arms in front of the lens like we were filming her on purpose. "Take that down, it's a violation of privacy," she shrieked from the other side of the fence. Melissa had reached her limit. "Karen, you've trespassed twice already," she said firmly. "Do it again, and I'll be taking legal action." Karen didn't back off. Instead, she escalated. One quiet Sunday morning, she returned with the entire HOA board in tow. They gathered just outside the fence line, pointing fingers and ranting about how our property was a disgrace to the neighborhood. They claimed the barn was an eyesore, that Melissa's patrol vehicle made the place look like a crime scene, and yes, they even insisted our goats were a danger to public safety. "Goats? Dangerous?" One of the board members, a gray-haired man named Bob, at least tried to be polite. "If you repainted the gate and maybe added some hedges, it might calm everyone down," he suggested. Melissa nodded. "We'll think about it." But Karen scoffed. "We shouldn't have to ask nicely. You're not above the rules, no matter how much you pretend to be in law enforcement." That was it. Melissa pulled out her badge and held it up. "I'm not pretending. I'm the police chief of this county." Karen's jaw dropped, but then she let out a laugh. "You actually expect me to believe that?" The following morning, Karen boldly walked through our gate out right past a clearly posted private property sign and stood near the barn with her phone out, filming again. Melissa, seeing her from the kitchen window, stepped outside to ask her to leave. That's when Karen started yelling and dialed 911, and that's how we ended up back at the Momentum, standing there in disbelief, Melissa in uniform, and Karen shouting into her phone while sirens grew louder in the distance. You could see it on Karen's face as she was starting to realize something wasn't right, but she still hadn't pieced it together. The squad cars arrived. One officer stepped out, took one look at Melissa, and gave her a respectful salute. Karen's eyes widened, but before anyone could speak, Melissa glanced past her and pointed toward the barn. "Karen, what's in your hand?" Karen turned to look, and in doing so, she dropped her phone along with something else that slipped from her purse and clattered onto the gravel. It caught the morning sunlight, a gleaming silver master key. Not just any key, a universal HOA gate key. Each one was uniquely tagged, logged, and meant to stay at HOA headquarters unless checked out for official use. Karen stood frozen. An officer stepped forward and picked it up carefully with a gloved hand, turning it over and reading the ID tag aloud. He looked at Melissa. "Chief, isn't this one of the whole lock system master keys? I thought these weren't supposed to leave the office." Melissa nodded slowly. "Correct. They're only used by the board for approved inspections on home-managed property." Karen went pale. "Yeah, I had permission. I was asked to do a spot inspection." Melissa tilted her head. "On my privately owned ranch?" Karen's eyes darted around, silently pleading for support. But even the board members who came with her were stepping back, arms crossed, not saying a word. The officer turned to Melissa. "Would you like to press charges?" Karen gasped. "Charges? Against me? She's the one threatening me." That's when another officer, Sergeant Daniels, stepped in. "Karen, she's your county's police chief, and you're trespassing on her land." Karen looked like the ground had just vanished beneath her. She can't be. She told me she was just a housewife." Melissa offered a faint smile. "I'm both, police chief and housewife, multitasking." The tension finally broke when Karen, red with embarrassment, shoved her phone back into her bag and marched off without saying another word. No apology, no explanation, just the sound of her heels crunching angrily over the gravel. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Melissa chose not to press charges, at least, not yet. "Let's see if she can act like a decent neighbor," she said, taking the high road. I respected her for that. But Karen wasn't done. Within days, a thick envelope showed up in our mailbox stuffed with 5 separate citations from the HOA. The envelope contained 5 separate citations from the HOA board, each more absurd than the last. One was for the color of our fence. Another targeted our security camera, calling it unauthorized surveillance equipment. A third claimed our 3 quiet goats, Larry, Mo, and Curly, were a source of disturbance. The fourth accused us of displaying aggressive signage. It was just a small private property plaque, But the final one was the most outrageous, an accusation of impersonating law enforcement. Melissa's hands trembled as she read it aloud. Impersonation? She repeated, her eyes narrowing. That's it. That evening, she sat at her desk and pulled up the official zoning maps, comparing them meticulously with the boundaries listed on our property deed. Then she drafted an email, not just to the HOA board, but to the city zoning office, the county clerk, the sheriff's department, and even the mayor's office. She attached photos, legal documents, maps, and a clear statement. My land is not under HOA jurisdiction. These citations are baseless. I am filing a formal complaint. The following morning, Karen didn't show up at the ranch. She came to Melissa's workplace instead. The front desk officer buzzed her over. Chief, there's a woman in the lobby, claims she's your neighbor, says you're abusing your authority. Melissa met her in the hallway. Karen was pacing like a caged animal. You're making me look bad, she hissed. Do you really think your legal mumbo-jumbo means anything? I've been on the HOA board for 15 years. Melissa stood tall. Karen, I don't need to make you look bad. You're doing that all by yourself. Karen leaned in, voice low. You might feel powerful now, but you don't get how this works. People like you don't last here. Melissa arched an eyebrow. People like me? Karen didn't answer. She simply turned and strutted out of the station like she ran the place. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about goats, gates, or property lines anymore. This was about dominance. About power. A personal war. That evening, the phone rang. It was Boba, the older HOA board member who'd always tried to keep things civil. He asked if we could meet him at our gate. We took the ATV down. Bob was waiting, but not alone. He carried a folder under his arm and kept glancing over his shoulder, as if afraid he'd been followed. I think you need to see this, he said quietly, handing it to Melissa. Inside were pages of documents, HOA financial records, minutes from private meetings, and most damning of all, a list of fabricated violations Karen had been issuing to residents she didn't like. Ours were right at the top. Melissa flipped through the papers slowly, her expression unreadable. Then she looked at him. Why are you giving me this, Bob? He sighed. Because I'm retiring, and because someone finally stood up to her. She's been bullying people for years. You're the first who didn't back down. Melissa gave him a slow nod. You did the right thing. He gave a faint smile. Just be careful. You've started something now. With that, he turned and walked away. Later that night, we sat on the porch with the folder spread out on the table between us. Melissa stared at it for a long time before speaking. This isn't just about us anymore, she said. If she's done this to us, she's done it to others too. I nodded. So what now? We build a case, she whispered, and we take her down by the book. But just when we thought we had the upper hand, the unthinkable happened. Our barn caught fire. The blaze lit up the sky in a furious glow. Flames roared like a wild beast, painting the fields in orange and black. We ran barefoot, dragging hoses, shouting over the crackle. But it was no use. The barn at the heart of our rancho was already lost. As I stood frozen, watching everything burn, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. A figure, a silhouette near the trees. Karen. She stood just beyond the pasture, at the edge of the woods, arms folded, face glowing in the firelight, and she was smiling. Smoke burned my eyes, but I saw her clearly. She didn't run, she didn't hide, she just stood there, still as a statue, watching the destruction like it was something she'd planned. I yelled, Karen, what are you doing here? She didn't reply, didn't move, just turned slowly and walked back into the Trespassing unhurried, like she had all the time in the world. By the time Melissa turned to look, she was gone. I grabbed a flashlight and ran toward the woods, coughing and barefoot, but she had already vanished into the brush. The forest behind our land stretched for miles. I couldn't search the woods and battle the fire at the same time. Melissa called the fire department. They arrived quickly, working through the night, dousing embers and sifting through the ashes. And yes, it wasn't an accident. The fire had been set. Once the flames died down and the last embers cooled, the fire chief pulled us aside. We found a clear trail of lighter fluid along the base of the structure. He said, brow furrowed, it's definitely arson. But no camera picked up a suspect. You didn't see anything? Melissa hesitated. Then she slowly shook her head. Not clearly. I looked at her. You're not going to say what you saw? She dropped her gaze. Not yet. Not until I can prove it. The silence between us was heavy, filled only by the soft hiss of smoldering cinders and the drip of water from the charred remains. The days that followed were eerily quiet. The barn was nothing more than a blackened skeleton. We'd moved our goats to Tony's uncle's farm a couple counties away. Thankfully, the chickens were unharmed if they'd been in a separate coop on the far end of the property. But Melissa barely spoke that week. She spent every spare hour in the garage, sorting through the documents Bob had handed over, drawing connections, marking patterns, highlighting names. One night, I brought her a mug of coffee and asked, "Are we going to let the insurance company know?" She nodded. "Already filed the claim, but the second we do, Karen's going to twist tie to make it seem like we burned down the barn for the payout. She'll spin it her way." "So, what's the plan then?" Melissa pulled out a zoning map, laying it flat on the table, exposed the entire hoe board. "Karen isn't acting alone. There's a pattern in who they target." I looked closer. There were names under Karen's crossed out in red ink. Families, young couples, a retired veteran, a single mom, even a preacher. All of them fined and then forced out, I said, clenching my fist. Melissa nodded. "She's forcing people to leave, and I'm going to prove it." That Friday, something unexpected happened. A young woman rang our doorbell. Nervous, clutching a brown folder, she kept glancing over her shoulder. "A broken bar I used to live on Elmage Drive," she said softly, "just 3 blocks inside the hoe's boundary." We invited her in. She sat at our kitchen table and opened the folder. Inside were printed copies of the same fake citations we'd received, word for word. "She did it to me too," the woman Akasa said, her voice shaking. "Because I hung a rainbow flag on my porch," she said. "It violated community decor standards." I tried to stand up to her, but the board backed her up. The fines piled up until I couldn't afford to stay. I had to move in with my sister. Melissa leaned in. "Do you have any emails? Any witnesses?" Casey shook her head. "Just screenshots. But if you're building something, I want in." Melissa smiled gently. "You just helped more than you know." That marked a turning point. Word spread. One by one, others began coming forward. Emails, phone calls, even anonymous letters left in our mailbox. The stories followed a pattern. Karen had built her own little empire within the hoe. She collected favors, punished dissent, and coerced homeowners into leaving. In some cases, she'd even taken bribes from a local developer to drive property sales and then fast-tracked zoning approvals to make space for new builds. Melissa gathered every document, labeled each entry, and began piecing the full case together. But Karen wasn't oblivious. She'd clearly sensed the pressure closing in. She started sending her own people, residents loyal to her, neighbors who owed her favors. They'd walk past our house with phones raised, snapping photos. One even approached Tony with a wad of cash, offering money in exchange for inside information about what Melissa was up to. Tony laughed in his face. The following day, we found our mailbox crushed in, smashed open like someone wanted to send a message without saying a word. A threat written in twisted metal. Melissa didn't flinch. She filed a police report, called the county attorney, and said to me, "We're almost there." Almost. That Sunday, I went into town to pick up groceries while Melissa stayed behind, organizing witness statements and documentation. When I returned, something felt off. The front door was slightly ajar. "Melissa," I called out, stepping inside. No response. My pulse quickened as I checked each room. Nothing seemed out of place until I reached the office. The space was wrecked. Papers scattered everywhere. Drawers ripped open. Melissa's laptop was missing. And on the whiteboard, scrawled in thick black marker, were 5 chilling words. "You should have just left." I pulled out my phone, ready to call Melissa, when the back door creaked open. There she was, standing in the doorway, mud smeared on her shoes, hair tousled, eyes wide. Melissa stood in the doorway, mud on her boots, hair windblown, holding up a small USB drive. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with purpose. "What happened?" I asked, rushing toward her. She held up the flash drive between her fingers. "I was one step ahead," she said, calm but firm. "I backed everything up last night." I stared at the trashed office behind her. "Karen, how can you be sure?" Melissa let out a deep breath. Because I followed her this morning. She met with 2 board members at that old, abandoned grocery warehouse off Route 9. She slid a photograph onto the table. Karen stood next to a man we recognized from the news, a developer recently indicted for fraud. Melissa's jaw tightened. She's laundering HOA funds, she said quietly. I took a step back, stunned. So Broken Bar, what now? Melissa's eyes flicked toward the blank space on the wall where her whiteboard used to hang. Now, she said, her voice low, we bring the fire to her doorstep. Before I could respond, the crunch of tires announced the arrival of a sheriff's deputy. An SUV pulled into the driveway. Melissa stepped outside to meet him. They spoke briefly in low tones, and when she came back in, her face had gone cold. They want me to step down while they review a complaint, she said. What? From who? Karen and 3 board members. They're accusing me of harassment, corruption, and abuse of power. The words hit like a punch. They're trying to destroy you. Melissa didn't blink. She just watched as the deputy's SUV backed out and drove away. Then she muttered, almost to herself, they started a fire they won't be able to put out. They gave her 3 days. 3 days of administrative leave while the city council reviewed a complaint that was built entirely on lies fabricated by Karen and her loyalists. They accused Melissa of using her position to intimidate residents, forging paperwork, even emotionally destabilizing the neighborhood. It was ridiculous, but it was working. For the first time since we moved to the ranch, Melissa's badge wasn't on her hip. It sat silently on the kitchen counter next to her half-drunk coffee. She hadn't touched it all day. When I found her standing at the window, arms crossed, staring out at the ruins of our barn, I walked over quietly. They want to humiliate you? I said. That's the goal, she replied without turning. Not just to shut me up but to make an example out of me. If they can take down the police for Broken Bar, imagine what they've done to people with no voice at all. She turned then, and I didn't see defeat, I saw resolve. I won't let that happen. She reached into her bag and held up the USB stick. Everything's still here, but it's not enough to fight quietly anymore. We're going public. That evening, we met Casey and 2 other former residents at a quiet diner just past the county line. One was James, a man who'd been forced out of his home after refusing to pay lawn care fines while he was hospitalized. The other, Marka, had once filed a harassment claim against Karen. She lost the case Broken Bar only to find out later her lawyer had personal ties to the HOA vice president. They brought evidence via emails, citations, correspondence. Melissa laid everything out on the table like pieces of a puzzle coming together. They've been doing this for years, she said, targeting anyone who doesn't fit their mold: single parents, LGBTQ families, veterans, people of color. If you don't fall in line, they find a way to push you out. James leaned forward. But what can we do? We don't have the kind of money it takes to fight them in court. They'll crush us again. Melissa's smile was fierce. They used the rules to come after us. I'm going to use those same rules to bring them down. She tapped the USB. The HOA charter has a clause buried in the founding documents. If more than 5 formal complaints are submitted in a 48-hour window, the city can trigger an emergency review of the board. We already have 4. If we get 2 more, we can file it. But you've been suspended, I reminded her. You can't act as chief. I don't need to, she replied. I'll do it as a citizen. And that next morning, Melissa struck back. She uploaded everything of the documents, audio files, security footage of Karen shouting, satellite overlays, and the full log of manipulated violations into a public online portal. She titled a page, "The HOA No One Voted For, Pine Hill Exposed." At the top, she posted a simple message: My name is Melissa Carter. I am a citizen of this county, a mother, a wife, and currently a suspended police chief. What you're about to read is not just my story. It's a warning about what happens when power goes unchecked and good people are bullied into silence. I'm done being silent. Within hours, the post exploded. Hundreds of comments flooded in. The community finally had a voice, and they were using it. Stories began pouring in comments, photos of warning letters, even videos of Karen berating residents. Former HOA board members, once quiet, now came forward admitting they'd been pressured, manipulated, even threatened into silence. Local reporters picked it up. One nightly news segment laid it all bare, a side-by-side breakdown of Karen's fabricated rules versus the actual HOA regulations that contradicted nearly every claim she'd made. Then the official responses began flooding in. Emails from the mayor's office, the county attorney, and the zoning commission all arrived within hours. Melissa's complaint had been reopened, and for the first time, Karen was losing control. But she didn't go quietly. Just after sundown that evening, loud banging echoed from the front gate. Tony opened the door and peeked out, then turned to us and whispered, "She's here." And she brought company. Melissa and I stepped outside. Karen stood just beyond the gate, furious, flanked by two of her supporters. "You think you are clever?" she snapped, eyes wild, posting lies online, stirring up gossip like some angsty teenager. Melissa didn't flinch. "Truth isn't gossip, Karen, and if everything I posted is fake, why are you sweating?" Karen marched closer, finger pointed in the air. "I built this neighborhood, and you are." She jabbed a finger toward Melissa. "You're nothing but a fraud with a badge and a big mouth. I'm going to finish what I started." She reached into her purse and yanked out a rolled bundle of papers, tossing them through the gate at Melissa's feet. "What is that?" I asked, eyeing the bundle. Karen's lips curled. "A notice. Effective immediately. The HOA is placing a lien on your property for non-compliance. You owe thousands in fines by the end of the month, or we'll proceed with foreclosure." My stomach sank, but Melissa calmly picked up the papers, unrolled them, and studied the text. After a moment, she smiled. "This is pathetic," she said. "You just issued a lien under a clause that doesn't even apply to us. Our deed has the exemption, Karen. You never had authority over this land. Not now, not ever." Karen's face shifted from rage to dread, like she was just realizing she'd been fighting a battle she'd already lost. "You have no idea what you've started," she hissed. "I know exactly what I've started," Melissa replied. Just then, a black SUV rolled up behind Karen. Out stepped a man in a county investigator's jacket. "Karen Wilson?" he asked as he approached. "You've been named in an active investigation for abuse of authority, fraudulent citations, destruction of private property, and possible arson." Karen's mouth fell open. "What? This is harassment." Melissa folded her arms. "Funny, that's exactly what you accused me of." The investigator handed Karen an official summons. "You're required to appear before a board hearing this week. Refusal to cooperate may result in criminal charges." Karen stood frozen, speechless for once. We turned to go back inside, but the investigator stopped us. "There's something else," he said. "We received a new anonymous tip linking Karen to the developer currently under investigation for bribing HOA boards across 3 counties. Melissa's eyes narrowed. "What kind of tip?" He opened his briefcase and pulled out a photograph. Karen was standing on the tarmac at a private airport, handing off a thick envelope. Next to her was the same developer Melissa had photographed at the abandoned warehouse. "This goes beyond HOA misconduct," the investigator said. "If what's in that envelope is what we suspect, she could be facing federal charges." He looked at us both. "You should brace yourselves. This isn't over. It's going to get messier before it gets better." Before we could even process that, Melissa's phone buzzed. She looked down at the screen, eyes wide. Then she held it up. "It's the mayor's office," she said. "They've reinstated me." My jaw dropped. "Seriously?" She smiled, relieved, but fierce. The complaint was dismissed. "They reviewed the evidence. I'm back." But just as the relief washed over us, a boom, an explosion rocked the side of the house. The windows shuddered, lights flickered, smoke rose thick and fast from the direction of the guest shed behind the barn. We sprinted outside, coughing, yelling. The shed was on fire again, but this time a broken bar. There were footprints, large ones, and fresh. Melissa crouched down, staring at the tracks, her voice a whisper. "She's not finished." But neither are we. The fire behind us roared, crackling through what was left of the guest shed. Flames leapt into the sky like a signal flare. I grabbed the hose while Tony sprinted for the fire extinguisher. Melissa, already on the phone, barked into it with a command that cut through the chaos. "This is Chief Melissa Carter. We have a second confirmed arson attack. Send fire units immediately and lock down every exit from Pine Hill. I want roadblocks now." She wasn't just reinstated. She was back in full force, focused, furious, and fearless. Within minutes, The driveway was lit in red and blue. Firefighters and officers moved with practiced urgency. No one had been inside the shed, thankfully, but the damage was total. Again, an officer approached Melissa. "Chief, we've got boot prints this time, clear as day. We'll send them to the lab." Melissa's expression didn't change. "I already know whose they are," she said. "I want Karen Wilson under surveillance tonight." "No contact, just eyes." The officer blinked. "You really think I know she did it?" By the next morning, the investigation into Karen Wilson and the Pine Hill home made front-page news. Police chief targeted in HOA power scandal. The story blew up online. Residents flooded social media with their own horror stories and unjust fines, property damage, harassment. The entire town was waking up. Casey and Marcia launched a community support group. They began planning a formal town hall. Melissa was officially reinstated, with a press conference set for later that week. Even the mayor called her personally to apologize. "Everything was moving in our favor, but we knew better than to let our guard down, because people like Karen don't go down quietly." 2 days later, Officer Wells, a young patrolman who had worked under Melissa for years, stopped by the house. He handed her a plain envelope. No return address, just a single note. "You think you are safe?" Inside were photographs of blurry, zoomed-in shots clearly taken with a telephoto lens. Melissa in uniform, Melissa in the driveway, Melissa at the school pickup line, one of us asleep in our bedroom. Melissa's hands clenched around the table's edge. "There's only one place that angle could come from," she said. "I rushed outside, scanning the property. At the edge of the tree line, I saw it. Fresh bark scrapes on one of the tall oaks. A low branch had been sawed off. A rusted camera mount remained, screwed into the crook. Empty. Someone had been watching us for weeks. We called the sheriff's department and installed more motion-triggered cameras around the house. I started sleeping with a crowbar and flashlight under the bed." Melissa kept her sidearm within reach, locked and loaded. And still Karen hadn't been arrested. The city investigation was slow, tangled in bureaucracy. Chain of command, legal procedure, internal reviews. It was the system Melissa had taught her officers to follow. But now, that same system was failing her, so she decided to act. That Thursday, she held a live press conference on the courthouse steps. Reporters gathered, cameras rolled, dozens of residents stood behind her. People who had been silenced, fined, pushed out. Even Tony stood near the back, arms folded across his chest, eyes unwavering. Melissa stepped to the mic. "My name is Chief Melissa Carter," she said. "Over the last few months, my home has been attacked, my family stalked, my career threatened, all by one woman, Karen Wilson, president of the Pine Hill Estates HOA." Flashbulbs lit the scene. "But this isn't just about me," she continued. "It's about the hundreds of residents who were harassed, fined illegally, and bullied because they didn't meet the personal standards of a corrupt board." Karen Wilson used her position to abuse power, and today as she held up a thick folder, "We are pressing charges." The crowd erupted in applause. Reporters shouted questions. Melissa turned, handed the folder to the county prosecutor, who gave a solemn nod and disappeared into the courthouse. I met her at the steps and pulled her into a tight hug. "We're really doing this," I whispered. She nodded. "But it's not over yet." And she was right. That night, we came home to find our front door wide open. No broken glass, nothing stolen. But on the living room wall, sprayed in blood red paint, were 3 chilling words. "You were warned." My blood ran cold. I tore through the house, checking each room. Tony ran to the barn. Melissa headed straight to the bedroom, opened her drawer, and retrieved her pistol. "We're being hunted," I whispered, heart pounding. Melissa didn't respond. She just clicked off the safety and walked toward the front door. Melissa nodded, then said something that sent a chill down my spine. "Karen's not just desperate, a broken bar, she's got help." The next morning confirmed it. Our security footage showed a masked figure entering our home at 2:34 a.m. They didn't break in, they used the front door code. Melissa's face hardened. Only 4 people knew that code. "We changed every lock, reset every password, filed another police report." But Karen remained untouchable. Every time Melissa tried to push the case forward, something slowed it down. If files went missing, calls weren't returned, court processes dragged. It felt like someone was jamming the system from the inside. And then, Another blow arrived. A letter from the county courthouse. Karen Wilson had filed a restraining order against Melissa, accusing her of harassment, intimidation, and abuse of power. Melissa opened it slowly. Her hands were steady, but I saw the tension in her jaw. This woman tried to burn our property, broke into our home, stalked USA Broken Bar, and now she's playing the victim. What does it mean? I asked. She's trying to drag me into court as a criminal before I can do the same to her. But you have the evidence. Melissa nodded grimly. Yes, but she has the head of the HOA's legal board in her pocket, and they've scheduled a hearing for tomorrow. She stood, clipped her badge back onto her belt, and said with quiet fury, "They want a war? They're about to get one." The courtroom was too small for what was about to unfold inside. Melissa sat at the defense table, composed and unflinching. She wore her full police uniform. Her badge gleamed under the overhead lights, boots polished, back straight. Her hands rested calmly on the table, as if to say I have nothing to hide. I sat directly behind her, heart pounding. Across the aisle, Karen looked like she was dressed for a brunch instead of a legal hearing. A beige blazer, pearl earrings, and that same smug smile. Next to her sat a razor-sharp attorney with a predator's stare, the same man we'd exposed just a week earlier in a zoning scandal. This was no coincidence. This was coordinated. The judge entered. Court is now in session. We are here to hear the matter of a temporary restraining order filed by Karen Wilson against Chief Melissa Carter. Karen jumped to her feet like she'd rehearsed it. "Your Honor, this woman has harassed me for months," she said dramatically. "She slandered my name online, used her badge to intimidate me, and encouraged vigilante behavior against my home. I no longer feel safe in my own community." The judge turned to Melissa. "Your response?" Melissa rose slowly. Her voice was firm, even. "Your Honor, I am the one who has been harassed. I have documented evidence that Ms. Wilson trespassed on my property, made a false emergency call, and is the likely orchestrator of 2 arson attacks on my home. I've submitted surveillance footage, sworn witness statements, and internal HOA documents proving a consistent abuse of power over the past several years." Karen scoffed loudly. "This is a smear campaign. She's twisting the truth." The judge raised a hand. "Miss Wilson, you'll have your turn." "Let her finish," Melissa continued. "This isn't about a restraining order. It's about control. Miss Wilson is using this courtroom as her last defense against accountability, and I will not back down, and not when good people have been fined, threatened, and driven out of their homes. I have upheld the law every step of the way." She reached into her case and handed a flash drive to the court clerk. Contained on this drive are over 50 pieces of evidence: documents, videos, signed statements, including testimony from your court-appointed mediator, confirming Miss Wilson's intimidation tactics. I submit them all for the record." The judge took a long pause, then nodded to the bailiff. "We will recess briefly to review the materials." Karen stormed out of the courtroom, her heels clicking like gunshots on the tile. In the hallway, I caught up to Melissa. "You did incredible," I whispered. She gave a small smile. "Now we wait." But we didn't wait long. 30 minutes later, the judge returned. "I have reviewed the submitted evidence," he said carefully. "And it is the finding of this court that not only is the request for a restraining order denied, but that sufficient concern has been raised to recommend immediate escalation to the county attorney's office for a formal criminal investigation into Miss Wilson's conduct as president of the Pine Hill HOA." A stunned silence fell across the courtroom. Karen's face drained of color. The judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I am issuing a temporary protective order in favor of Chief Carter, as the court now finds reasonable cause to believe Ms. Wilson has unlawfully surveilled and harassed her and her family." His gavel came down hard. "Court is adjourned." The gavel struck once, sharp and final. "But Karina," she exploded, "you think this is over?" She screamed, voice shrill and venomous. "You have no idea who you're messing with." Melissa didn't blink. She turned slowly, locked eyes with her, and said coolly, "I know exactly who I am dealing with." We didn't even make it to the parking lot before the next wave hit. Melissa's phone buzzed. It was Tony, calling from the ranch. He'd gone to check on the storm damage. "Chief," he said, voice tight, "I found something under your porch. Looks like a tracker or a mic. I texted you a pic." Melissa opened the message. A small black Davicea no bigger than a matchbox taped discreetly beneath the steps. A GPS tracker, she muttered. Hidden. Her expression hardened. Whoever's helping Karina broken bar, they're escalating. We sped home and called the sheriff. The forensics team came out, dusted the tracker for prints. Then we locked down everything: and new door codes, extra cameras, motion sensors with night vision, reinforced locks. Melissa didn't sleep. I want them to try again, she whispered that night, staring out the window. This time, I'll be ready. The next morning, the real bombshell dropped. Casey called, breathless. Melissa, check the group chat. A private investigator posted something. Video footage. You need to see it. Melissa put the call on speaker as I pulled up the file on her laptop. The grainy surveillance video showed Karen, under the cover of night, walking across an empty park lot. She shook hands with a man in a hood and handed him something wrapped in cloth. The caption from the investigator read, "That's Ray Donovan, former HOA board treasurer, fired last year." There's a sealed fire claim linked to his name. It could be connected. Melissa frows. Ray Donovan, a broken bar, she whispered, flipping through her files. She yanked out an old name sheet from Bob's folder. There it was. Ray Donovan, a fired. Reason, internal misconduct. File sealed. Melissa's jaw tightened. If he's involved, Karen has access to everything: locked codes, legal filings, records, everything. We immediately called the investigator. He confirmed it. Ray had been spotted entering the back of the HOA office after hours using Karen's keycard. And just like that, it all clicked. The forged citations, the stalling legal processes, the missing files. Karen hadn't been acting alone. She had a network, and we had no idea how far it reached. That night, we upgraded again. Backup powerful, the cameras, hidden trail sensors. I was locking the side gate before bed when something metallic caught my eye by the bushes. I knelt down, brushed back the dirt. A broken bar and froze. A warm bullet casing. Fresh. My heart slammed into my chest. "Melissa!" I shouted. She sprinted over, crouched beside me, and picked it up. Her face went still. "This isn't intimidation anymore," she said. "This is a message." I swallowed hard. "You think someone's still out there?" Melissa rose slowly, drew her sidearm, eyes scanning the tree line. "If they area broken bar," she looked at me, voice like steel, "then they just made their last mistake." We didn't sleep. Melissa sat up all night, watching every flicker of the trees on the surveillance monitors. Her hand never left her holster. I sat beside her, gripping a crowbar like it was a sword. Every creak felt like a countdown. The bullet casing changed everything. Someone had stood there, loaded, watching our home. By dawn, the sheriff's department had surrounded the property. Deputies swept the grounds, roped off crime scene tape, and moved with urgency. And then they found them. Boot prints, same size, same tread pattern as the ones by the barn fire. But this time, they led somewhere specific, through the woods, directly behind Karen's house. A search warrant was secured by noon. Officers stormed Karen's manicured lawn with flashlights and evidence bags, combing through garden beds and beneath the porch, scanning every inch of her white picket fence. Section 8. Melissa stood just outside the tape line, arms crossed. A broken bar. Melissa stood just outside the yellow tape, arms crossed, watching it all unfold. A deputy emerged from Karen's garage, carrying a plastic tub. Inside were HOA records, financial ledgers, a ring of spare master keys, and in a black case, an unregistered hunting rifle, its barrel dusted with fresh gunpowder residue. Karen, standing on her porch in nothing but a robe, screamed like a cornered animal. "This is a setup. She planted that. She's the copus." She could have planted everything. But no one was listening anymore. She was cuffed right there on her front steps and placed into the back of a cruiser. The HOA board's vice president showed up minutes later in a panic. When he tried to interfere with the search, he was detained for obstruction and brought in for questioning. The web was finally unraveling. Back at the ranch, Melissa stood by the front gate, the same one where Karen had once shrieked at her, threatening to call the police on a woman who was the police. She stared out over our land, the charred remnants of the old barn, the new fencing, the fresh security lights. "She really thought she could burn us out," she said quietly. I stepped beside her. "All she did," I said, "was light the match that exposed everything." She smiled, and not with pride, but with peace. The next 2 weeks saw the collapse of Pine Hill's infamous HOA. Karen Wilson was formally charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, arson, stalking, and unlawful surveillance. Investigators traced fake citations to illegal bonuses paid to board members from HOA dues. Ray Donovan, the disgraced former treasurer, turned himself in, offering to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. His confession was explosive. He admitted to forging documents, erasing violations for Karen's allies, and planting the GPS tracker on our property. Most chilling of all, he confessed to placing the bullet casing outside our home as ordered by Karen. She denied everything, but the evidence was overwhelming. Bail was denied. She remained behind bars, awaiting trial. And the HOA dissolved. The city council, overwhelmed by letters and petitions from outraged residents, voted unanimously to revoke Pine Hill HOA's authority. All regulatory power was handed to city code enforcement. It was done. On the day the decision was made public, Melissa stood before a packed town hall. Cameras flashed. The air was thick with emotion. "I didn't fight back because I was the police chief," she said. "I fought because I was tired of watching good people get crushed under the weight of bad power. I fought because everyone deserves to feel safe in their home. That's what justice means to me." The applause was deafening. Some stood, some cried. Even Bobet, a former board member who started it all by slipping us that first folder, was there. He walked up to Melissa afterward, shook her hand, and said, "You gave this town its voice back." Months later, peace finally returned to the ranch. We rebuilt the barn stronger this time, with steel beams and a fireproof roof. Above the entrance, Melissa's badge number was carved into the wood. The goats came home. Tony stayed on full-time. Casey took a job as Melissa's assistant at the station. And Karen? She stayed in jail. Her trial was set for the following spring, now already being called a landmark case in HOA abuse. One evening, under a sky blanketed with stars, Melissa leaned her head against my shoulder. "Do you remember the first time she screamed at me at the gate?" she asked. I laughed. "Yeah, she had no idea you were the law." Melissa smiled softly. "She tried to call the cops on me," she whispered. "Now she sees them every day." I kissed her forehead. "And they all report to you." She laughed for the first time in weeks. That night, with the glow of our new barn behind us and the scent of fresh hay in the breeze, we sat in silence. Not because we were afraid, not because we were preparing for another battle, but because for the first time in a long, long broken bar we were home. Truly home.